What's up mga ka-public ad? Hello Doc Heidi and mabuhay beautiful Philippines. So our topic is all about the characteristics of good governance. So here is our specific objectives. So at the end of the lesson, we are expected to first, critically define the meaning of good governance. Second, identify and enumerate the 8 characteristics of good governance according to UNDP. Third, describe each element of indicators of good governance. Fourth, determine how these indicators can be utilized in the measurement of performance of the government or assess whether these indicators are present in the government. Fifth, illustrate the interlinkages among the different elements of governance. And sixth, present some examples of best practices in good governance. So what are we waiting for? Let's proceed to the first topic.
Hi everyone, before I start, I would like to introduce myself. I am Rachel May Fuentes, one of the reporters. So to start with, let us first know the definition of good governance and present some example of it. So like governance can be good or bad, but one goal of a good governance is to enable organization to do its work and to fulfill its mission. So good governance results in organizational effectiveness. Example of this one is good governance practices in the private sector in Canada, in the United States, the United Kingdom, and elsewhere. So private sectors are expected to provide corporate social responsibility, which includes sustainable development and the needs to address the social, economic, and environmental impacts of the various operations. So we already discussed about the CSR in our subject corporate governance, wherein private sectors have responsibility to its stakeholders, which includes the society where it resides. So good governance is, among other things, like participatory, transparent, and accountable. It is also effective and equitable, and it promotes the rule of law. So good governance ensures that political, social, and economic priorities are based on broad consensus in the society, and that the voices of the poorest and the most vulnerable one are heard in decision making over the allocation of development resources. That's all.
Good evening everyone, I am Josh Nathaniel Aiganzon, one of the reporter of Group 3. So now, since we already understand the definition of good governance, let us now deepen our knowledge about it by knowing the major characteristics given by the UNDP. So, according to them, the good governance has 8 major characteristics. It is participatory, consensus-oriented, accountable, transparent, responsive, effective, and efficient, equitable and inclusive, and follows the rule of law. So let's have participation. Participation by both men and women is a key cornerstone of good governance. All men and women should have a voice in decision making, either directly or through legitimate intermediate institutions that represent their interests. So, as we all know that the society changes, it is not only the man ang nasusunod. Now we are also given, the women are also given the opportunity to have the right to speak or have voice. So it is said that the good governance should have the ear or should accept participation or any cooperation by both men and women. And also it could be their own voice, or it could be a group of institutions. We also have this what we call party list. We have Gabriela and different institutions that represent their advocacy. So those party lists or those activists or advocacies are part of the participation. So the good government should hear that one and also should listen to them. So next, let's have the rule of law. So legal frameworks should be fair and enforced impartially, particularly the laws on human rights. So yes, the government before imploring or having a law or policy, they should consider its effect or its cost to the majority. So dapat walay maapakan or walay paglabag or violation of human rights if magsasagawan ng batas or policy. It is also stated in the 1987 Constitution, Article 3, Section 1, that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor any person shall be denied the equal protection of the laws. Now let's have transparency. Transparency is built on the free flow of information. Processes, institutions, and information are directly accessible to those concerned with them, and enough information is provided to understand and monitor them. So here in the transparency, it means that the government is honest. Every step that the government will make it is sure that the people will know about it. Just like, say for example, the government have channel which is the PTV. It is owned by the government, and also the different government agencies, they have available informations or websites online wherein nakalagay doon yung mga informations about the laws and everything in program, everything na the people will want to know. Let's have the responsiveness. Institutions and processes try to serve all stakeholders. So the government have different institutions and it have their own different jobs. So the stakeholder of the government is us people, not only people, the public, but also the private sectors. So meron different institutions na nakalaan to help both public and private sectors. So next is the consensus-oriented. Good governance mediates differing interests to reach a broad consensus on what is the best interest of the group and where possible on policies and procedures. So kagaya nga nang sinabi ko kanina na if the government will going to make a policy or law, it should be have a good impact or agreed by the majority. So it is before also having this law or policy, tinitingnan muna natin this group of people na makikinabang nito at kung how important it is to their ethnicity or to their needs. Equity and inclusiveness. So all men and women have opportunities to improve or maintain their well-being. So both men and women have the opportunity or the rights to speak up or to empower their gender identity or something like that. Not only men and women but also the members of LGBTQ+A. So they should be heard, and the good government will going to accept whether it's a man or a woman. Effectiveness and efficiency. Processes and institutions produce results that meet needs while making the best use of resources. So as a good leader or as those people are in the position, it needs a decision-making process kung ano yung kinakakalabasan ng isang proyekto or something like that. Or and also they need to filter what are the best resources to use prior to that project or to that policy. Next is the accountability. Decision makers in government. Next is accountability. Decision makers in government, the private sector, and civil society organizations are accountable to the public as well as to institutional stakeholders. This accountability differs depending on the organization and whether the decision is internal or external to an organization. So when we say accountability, they are accountable or meron silang pananagutan in every move that they will going to do. So meron silang pananagutan or accountable sila sa public. So whether it's a private or a public organization. So when we say public organization, we have the government, different organizations provided by the government. So they need to be accountable in everything or every move that they will going to do to the public, and especially the private sector, wherein they have this what we call CSR or corporate social responsibility, wherein they have responsibility to give to their stakeholders or to the community where they reside. Lastly is the strategic vision. Leaders and public have a broad and long-term perspective on good governance and human development, along with a sense of what is needed for such development. So, kita mga Filipinos and also our leaders have a vision for our country. We want our country to be something like this. We want the Philippines to be something like this in the next 10 years. So we have visions, we would like to do something like that. So, the leaders should have the strategy or have the plan or move to do para makamit yung vision na yon. So, for example, President Duterte, his administration. So, he have a vision na mawala ang drugs sa Pilipinas. So, meron siyang plano na tanggalin by a drug war or something. Oh, yes, drug war. So, and also the Build program. He wants to build a lot of infrastructures in the Philippines, and now we napapakinabangan na natin siya. So that is an example of a strategic vision. So those are the characteristics of good governance by UNDP.
Icebreaker. Please open your camera and participate. You have 30 seconds to prepare.
It's a beautiful world, it's a beautiful life. Alright. Oh, it's a beautiful world, it's a beautiful life. Make your move and make love till the sun shine. Hey, it's a beautiful world, it's a beautiful life. Make your move and make love till the sun shine.
Sexy ladies going crazy, put your hands in the air. We can party, get retarded, acting like we don't care. All my fellas popping bottles, put your drinks in the sky. Glass is high, feel the vibe. It's a beautiful
worry like you did before.
Are we all good and energized? Great! Now we are ready to proceed to the next part of our topic. But before that, allow me to introduce myself. I am Saras Jade Vedigama and I am one of the reporter. After we discover the 8 characteristics of a good governance by the UNDP, let us now talk about the 4 basic elements of good governance according to ADP or the Asian Development Bank. First, we have the accountability. Accountability means making public officials answerable for government behavior and responsive to the entity from which they derive authority. In its key dimension is to establish criteria to measure performance of public officials and institutionalizing mechanisms to ensure that standards are met. These are the specific areas of action. First, we have the public sector management. Second, we have the public enterprise management. And third, we have the public financial management. And the last one, we have the civil service reform. We are now done talking about the accountability, so let's proceed to the second one, which is the participation. Participation refers to enhancing people's access to and influence on public policy processes. Its key dimension undertaking development for and by the people. Specific areas of action. Participation of beneficiaries and affected groups interface between government and the private sector. And the second one is the decentralization of public and service delivery function or the empowerment of local government cooperation with non-governmental organizations. So now we are done talking about the participation. Then now let's talk about the predictability. Predictability refers to the existence of laws and regulations and policies to regulate society and the fear of consistent application of this. Its key dimension is to establish and sustain appropriate legal and institutional arrangements, observing and upholding the rule of law, maintaining consistency of public policies. So, the specific areas of action is the law and development. The second one is the law frameworks for private sector development. So now let's proceed to the last one of the 4 basic elements of good governance of ADP, which is the transparency. Transparency refers to the availability of information to the general public and clear government rules, regulations, and decisions. Its key dimension is to ensure access to accurate and timely information about the economy and the government policy. So, the specific areas of action is the disclosure of information. Thank you.
So, good evening everyone. My name is Vanessa Dihapi and I am the one who assigned to tackle about the Institute on Governance and 5 Principles of a Good Governance. As we discuss about the elements or indicators of good governance by UNDP, we understand how essential it is to have a good governance in a country. The Institute of Governance, on the other hand, give us the 5 principles of a good governance, wherein they make the text given by the UNDP as their basis. So the first principle of a good governance is the legitimacy and voice. And it has 2 components, which is the participation and the consensus orientation. First is participation. All men and women should have a voice in decision making, either directly to legitimate intermediate institutions that represent their intentions. Such a broad participation is built on freedom of association and speech, as well as the capabilities to participate constructively. Second is the consensus orientation. Good governance meditates differing interests to reach a broad consensus on what is the best interest of the group and, where possible, on policies and procedures. The second principle of a good governance is direction. Direction has a strategic vision. Leaders and publics have a broad and long-term perspective on good governance and human development, along with a sense of what is needed for such development. There is also an understanding of the historical, cultural, and social complexity in which that perspective is grounded. The third principle of a good governance is a performance. Performance has responsiveness, effectiveness, and efficiency. Responsiveness. Institution and process try to serve all stakeholders, while effectiveness and efficiency process the institution produce results that meets need while making the best use of resources. The fourth principle of a good governance is accountability. Accountability and transparency. Accountability. Decision makers in government, the private sectors and civil society organizations are accountable to the public, as well as the institutional stakeholders. This accountability differs depending on the organization and whether the decision is internal or external. Transparency. Transparency is built on the free flow of information processes. Institutions and information are directly accessible to those concerned with them, and enough information is provided to understand and monitor them. So the last principle of a good governance is fairness. Fairness has equity and rule of law. Equity. All men and women have opportunity to improve or maintain their well-being. Rule of law is a legal framework should be fair and enforced impartially, particularly the laws on human rights. So those all the good governance principles. So that's all. Thank you.
Good morning, ma'am. My name is Ari Cristobal Gamali Jr. from BPA 1C, and this is my report from group. This is my report from group 3. Best practices in good governance. Introduction, self-introduction. In this part, which is the last part of our report, we will know the best practices in good governance. Governance can incorporate many different practices, especially some of the primary best practices include building a competent board, aligning strategies with goals, being accountable, having a high level of ethics and integrity, defining rules and responsibilities, and managing risk effectively. Magbibigay po ako ng sample po dito. Governance can incorporate many different practices, especially some of the primary best practices include building a competent board, aligning strategies with goals, being accountable, having a high level of ethics and integrity, defining roles and responsibilities, and managing risk effectively. Nabasa po natin ngayon ay isa po sa mga halimbawa. 10 good corporate governance examples. So what do corporate governance examples look like? 1. Integrate business management system (BMS), a document policy management system. 3. ISO certification. 4. CAPA systems. 5. Routine internal audits. 6. Training management system. 7. Risk management.
So, it's time for checklist. First is definition of good governance. Check. Second, characteristics of good governance according to UNDP. Check. Elements of good governance according to ADP. Check. So, 5 principles of good governance. Check. And best practices in good governance. Check. So, great job! We are now complete with our third lesson, characteristics of good governance. If you have any questions and clarifications, don't hesitate to ask during our meeting. Thank you and have a great evening.